There is debate brewing over the future of nuclear power plants, and Illinois has become the center of a legislative battle that could have wide ranging consequences for both the state's and the country's energy future. Well, joining me now is Cheddar reporter Alex Vuocolo. Alex, it's good to see you this afternoon. Break down what is happening in Illinois.
Hey, Kristen. So the state legislature is currently debating a bill that would close all carbon-emitting plants in Illinois by 2035 and transition fully to renewables by 2050. Nuclear, of course, does not emit carbon, but hanging in the balance are 694 million in subsidies for three of the state's six nuclear plants, at least two of which are set to close without the support due to fierce competition from cheap natural gas. This is a huge deal for Illinois because nuclear power currently generates 66% of electricity in the state, and any loss of nuclear power would mean that demand would have to be met elsewhere. On the surface, the question of nuclear subsidies hasn't been a primary focus in the fossil fuels versus renewables debate that has shaped environmental politics over the last few decades, but an emerging of coalition of pro-nuclear activists say the issue is key to fighting climate change. And as emissions reductions deadlines loom, they argue that nuclear power will be essential in any plan to decarbonize utility-scale energy production.
Wow, 66% of that state's power. I can see where this is, a bit of a tricky decision. Is this happening anywhere else, Alex?
Yes, it is. Really, anywhere that nuclear is competing on open energy markets, it's really struggling to keep up with the price of natural gas. As a result, a number of plants have faced closure. In New Jersey, for example, two of their biggest nuclear power plants were primed to close, and then the New Jersey Board of Utilities unanimously approved $300 million in zero-emission certificate subsidies that basically allowed them to keep going. The board cited stability, maintaining jobs, but also environmental goals as why they chose to do that. In addition, there was the Indian Point nuclear plant, just 25 miles north of where I'm sitting. That plant was actually closed, initially because it was struggling to compete with natural gas, but ultimately because the governor and other interests decided that it wasn't worth the risk of having a nuclear plant so close to Manhattan. So that also suffered a similar fate that the plants in Illinois and New Jersey could have faced. That could have been their future if not for the support from the government.
So it is interesting that environmental organizations like the Natural Resource Defense Council haven't gotten behind recent efforts to subsidize these nuclear plants. Alex, how do they explain their position?
Essentially, I spoke with one group, and their argument is that they weigh risk a little bit differently. In their view, the potential safety problems that could come with having a malfunction at a plant that is so close to a major population center is not worth whatever benefits they would get from, avoiding carbon emissions. At the same time, I think they also just put more stock in the ability of solar and wind to replace carbon-emitting energy sources. Obviously, pro-nuclear proponents argue these fears are overblown. They also criticize, to some extent, the ability of solar and wind to replace what nuclear currently provides. And at the very least, they sort of argue that we have to maintain the fleet that we currently have, even if we don't move forward with new projects.
What role does the federal government play here?
So as some of the anecdotes I shared show, states are arguing over huge amounts of money and whether or not they want to invest them in plants that are in varying states of repair, and trying to do the calculus, is it worth it, given that more and more states are also putting themselves on a deadline when it comes to meeting carbon emission reductions. The federal government, I think, could be very useful in that it would kind of take this issue out of topic of budgets, state budgets. And I think a lot of pro-nuclear proponents that any sustainable solution to maintaining the current fleet, let alone building new plants, would have to come with some significant federal support.